Welcome to the Cybersecurity Simplified podcast, where we take the mystery out of today's top security threats and solutions. In the cybersecurity war, there are no rules. The enemy has upped their game with more frequent and destructive attacks. What can you do? Take your cybersecurity defense to the next level. Stay ahead of evolving threats with vulnerability management. In this episode of Cybersecurity Simplified, we will talk about how to go from reactive to adaptive strategies with our guest, vulnerability management expert, Cristian Sandescu, founder and CEO of CODA Intelligence. Stay tuned. Hello, all. Welcome to the podcast. I am your co-host, Susanna Song.
And I'm co-host Dave Barton.
Hi, David. How are you today?
Good. It's been a while since we've done one of these. I'm not sure if I remember how.
Well, I hear... first of all, we were at a trade show in Las Vegas very recently, and I hear there was a celebrity sighting.
Yeah, I don't know about celebrity, but I had a few folks come up and tell me how much they appreciate our podcast.
Yeah,
in fact, they sought out our booth, and some of them obviously hadn't watched it. They heard it because they're like, "Which one of you is David Barton?" Right? So they didn't actually watch it, but they listened to it. So To me, that was super flattering, just knowing that people listen to what we have to say, they like it, they provide feedback. It was very humbling, to be honest with you.
Well, that is awesome to hear. And really, the success of this show has been made possible only through our amazing viewers and listeners. So I hope all of you who are out there are growing in your knowledge of security. And David, I really enjoy recording these episodes with you. And quite frankly, I'm learning from you as well. So every episode we do, I'm growing in my knowledge as well.
You know, Susanna, we may want to get some mugs with some logos on them that were I watch this guy who does and this is a little segue, but he does first reviews of music, and so he's got his headphones on, he's listening to music, and he's got his mug with a logo, and he talks about the water he drinks, and that's what funds his show. So, maybe we need to get some sponsors. I'm just saying.
Now that David is a celebrity, so yeah,
right.
we'll get there,
and we'll get more shares that way, more likes.
We'll see. All right,
maybe
switching gears now, because we have a gentleman, if you're watching, who is standing by, and that's Cristian, right? So we did a quick intro on Cristian. So before we get into what is vulnerability management, Cristian, why don't you tell us about yourself and CODA?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you here today. So just a few words about myself. I started my career back in 2006. In exactly vulnerability management, but actually in a more specific role. I started off as a pen tester. So I did
as a pen tester.
Yeah. It's a popular word today, and it's been pretty exciting for me to be in that role. I had it for probably 9 years or so. I built up an entire team that was doing that. We then did a little bit more red teaming exercises, so full scale on attacks against organizations, mostly financial institutions, but others as well, trying to identify vulnerabilities and actually exploit them for the greater good and for talking to the remediation owners and then helping them remediate those. So that was a good part of my professional experience. I enjoyed it a lot, and then I realized, there's so much you can do as a person and even as a company by just doing it yourself or having to manually go through the same things again and again. And that's how we started CODA.
David, can I ask you, so where does vulnerability management fit into our defense in depth when it comes to threat prevention? Why is it so important?
So it's critical for a couple of reasons. One is, as we've all seen over the last 15 years, the threats to our organizations evolve every day. And if you're not looking through your organizational infrastructure, systems, applications for those changes and vulnerabilities to those changes, you're going to miss them. So you have to have a program that looks on a periodic basis, frequent, whatever the frequency is, could be daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, but looks at your infrastructure, your, again, applications, your Active Directory, your servers, your Linux boxes, whatever, and look for known vulnerabilities. And then more importantly, report on that. And then as we evolve this conversation, maybe automate patching, right? We haven't even started talking about automation, but finding the problems is half the battle, and then going to fix them and having a tool that tracks all of that from, hey, we found this, to here's a ticket to go get it fixed, to it's been fixed, to we validated it's been fixed, right? And that has to be part of that process. I used to work for a guy at Sprint, and he says, fix, test, fix, test, fix, test, fix. It was just a mantra. We did it over and over because the models kept changing. The threat models kept changing, and people keep introducing new stuff that
Right.
that Chris and I have to think about. What's the risk to the organization with this new thing, whatever it is? So it has to be central to your defense in depth approach, right? Because it covers not just workstations, but if you look at the wheel, it covers users to some extent. It covers devices. It covers the network, the perimeter, right? All of those parts that we pay attention to, it checks them to make sure that they have the most updated patches, there's no risk, et cetera, et cetera.
And I'm assuming with the talent shortage and just, humans can only do so much. Vulnerability management goes beyond just people power. Are you adding AI, ML technology to uncover the holes?
Yeah, I think you have to. First of all, it does go beyond the people power. When you have a short staff, you tend to focus on what's hot, and what's not hot is running a vulnerability scan, right? It's just part of your basic defense, and if you're not doing it, you may find other things that become hot due to a breach or a ransomware event, whatever. Scanning is a preventative tool. Vulnerability management is a preventative method to reduce risk. And it's not sexy. I mean, Chris might argue with me. It's not a sexy tool, but it's a necessary tool. Now, the sexy part is when you have that tool and you make it cool. You make it, the interface is really nice. You make automation on there so that you can reduce the human component. But it has to be done. And again, back to your question, if I've only got 3 people and I've got a fire, the last thing I want to do is go focus on a vulnerability scan. And that's where a service based on a product like Chris's comes into play.
What I also like to add to that, David, is, being in this pen testing world really made us look into what are those critical vulnerabilities that are actually being exploited, because not all of them are. And this is where the product really shines, is helping David's team with and you guys in identifying what are those vulnerabilities that are part of attack kill chains that are now exploited by threat actors into active threat campaigns. And this is really important because as you were just saying, David, there aren't just loads and loads of people just waiting to patch and waiting to remediate. It's
exactly,
we need to be really, and this is at the core of our values. It is to identify and help put in that contextual risk scoring on top of the initial vulnerability score to take into consideration if that vulnerability is part of an attack kill chain, and if it is going to be potentially leveraged by an attacker during.
Yep.
during an attack.
Agree.
Chris, how does Overwatch vulnerability management take a customer's defensive game to the next level? Because it's not just defending, but you're saying that your product also goes from reactive to adaptive to stay ahead.
So all of that is through this unique prioritization process, which then follows on with integrations into automated remediations. So that's where we want to get, and that's where the most value is for a lot of our customers. The idea there is that a lot of those vulnerabilities that are being identified, either misconfiguration, software bugs, not unapplied patches, not all of them are actually exploitable.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, you would need what we call an attack kill chain. That means a series of vulnerabilities, out of which some of them might even be at the layer 8 or the human level, such as a spear phishing. We're seeing spear phishing as being one of the first steps within modern ransomware attacks. But after the spear phishing has been successfully delivered to a couple of victims, then the piece of malware is going to actually try to exploit some of the critical vulnerabilities, either locally or across the network, allowing the attacker to pivot from the initial host to one of the other hosts that has relevant business data. They're trying to get to the crown jewels, and that's what everybody's trying to protect. What we do really, really well is identifying and correlating information within the customer's environment using data fusion to get that data within our platform and overlapping different perspectives that you can have on your own network, looking at it from the outside as well as looking at it from the inside, looking at network devices as well as end user workstations, servers that can be on-prem, in the cloud, mobile devices. All of that goes into the platform, goes into the contextual risk scoring, gets prioritized according to the business metrics as well as the threat intel metrics that we have in the product. And then you get presented with really actionable items that you can either take on to do because they're critical and you agree to them, you're presented with the fact that they're critical, or just if they're just normal unexploited vulnerabilities, you can leave them to the next patching cycle. You don't really have to worry about it.
And so, David, where does Overwatch, our 24/7 SOC, come in? So take what Chris just mentioned. So what do our customers do or an enterprise do with those exploits or those alerts? And if they don't have the people, how does a 24/7 SOC come in?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes in a variety of ways. Number one is we've got a second set of eyes looking at the data as well. And so if we see a critical event fire off from the vulnerability management tool into our SOC has the ability to reach out and go, hey, by the way, we just saw this thing. In a better connected world, they could right click and say, patch the device, right? So at 2 a.m., you could have our SOC team patching a critical vulnerability because you're at risk, right? So there's multiple things we can do. At the end of the day, what the managed component of this does is, number one, it correlates the events with active threats. And so if we see something on your environment that's attacking a known vulnerability that we have discovered with the vulnerability management tool, that changes our risk rating, right? Now, where we're going with this, and this is why this relationship is so essential to us, is we're going to go to a place where when our SOC platform detects an event, it's going to check to see, or maybe kick off a scan to see if it's vulnerable, right? And if the vulnerability comes back as being positive, it's going to automate a response with our patching tool to go patch it. And in those steps, there's been zero human interaction. And that's phenomenal, right? It's almost AI patching itself, if you will, right? That's where we're going. And that's why this relationship is so essential for our customers. It's a multi-tenant platform. It's got outside in, inside in, administrative level scanning, does a lot of things to help detect bad or known vulnerabilities, or even some unknowns that you may not be aware of yet. We can set cadence that does daily, weekly, monthly. We can have differential scans that say, yesterday you had a 98, today you got an 80. What's different, right? That lets us be proactive in actioning a ticket or reaching out to call someone and say, hey, we just saw this machine and it's vulnerable. And then we saw it in our SOC and it's trying to beacon out. We blocked it, but the machine needs patched. So there's a lot that we can do with it as a managed component. I think the most simplest answer, though, Susanna, is we take that responsibility off the plate of the end customer.
Right.
We do it for them. And we do it with people who are trained and knowledgeable. This is their livelihood. They're security experts.
Well said, David. Any final thoughts, Chris, before we wrap things up here?
Well, the final thought that I'm having is really nobody should be breached today by a threat actor who is exploiting a known vulnerability. So we really want to reduce the period that the organization is aware about it. And as David was just mentioning, in an ideal world, we'd like to be able to auto patch anything that's really critical and just reduce the exposure that any organization has to kind of threats.
Yeah, agreed.
That's the goal we're working on, and we're super excited to be working with Highwire and Overwatch on this one, as it's critical to being part of a better world where attackers just don't have that much of an attack surface that they can just exploit.
Exactly. Yep, I'm with you.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you to our guest, Cristian Sandescu, for joining us. Thank you also to our listeners. If you have feedback about today's podcast or questions for David or the Overwatch team about vulnerability management, please contact us at podcast@highwirenetworks.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube or our website, just leave a comment. And David, I will make sure to get maybe some bobbleheads.
There we go.
Yeah, I just thought of that.
We'll get one, right? Why not?
But thanks again for everyone joining us. Be sure to join us for our next episode, Keeping Medical Networks Healthy with Good Cyber Hygiene. Until next time, I'm Susanna Song.
I'm Dave Barton.
And this is Cybersecurity Simplified. From all of us here at Overwatch by Highwire Networks, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Cybersecurity Simplified podcast. To learn more, visit us at highwirenetworks.com/podcast.